Yes, this is John G. Sutton, and welcome to Tales from the Jails. I'm going to talk a little bit about intimidation. My intimidation, the people that intimidated me when I was working at Strangeways in specific. Yeah, it was 1979, 1980, and I was forming a union, as I previously discussed, for non-supervisory grade officers, which, anybody who's got any sense will realise that you can't appoint your line manager to be your representative at a trade union level. Who do you go to? You're a working man, yeah? Prison officers are working men, yeah? I was, certainly. So you find that you're being allocated shifts that are outside of the scope or the remit of your contract of employment, and that these are being allocated to you by principal and chief officers. So you decide that you're not going to have this because it's outside of your contract of employment. So you go to complain to your trade union, and who's representing you at trade union level? Well, at Strangeways, it was a principal officer who was part of the team that were allocating duties that were outside of the actual contract of employment. And when questioned about this, they said, "Oh, we've come to an agreement with the governor that there will be compulsory overtime." I said, "Listen, you can agree what you want, but my contract of employment states that I'll work 40 hours a week, and I'll work 40 hours a week. I've no problem with that. But I'm not going to work 60 hours a week. I'm studying. I was studying law at Manchester University. I said, I can't do that. I can't work all these hours and study at the university. I can't do it. I have to have the time that I'm allocated, do 40 hours, and the rest of the time I'm going to spend it studying and attending the courses." No, we've agreed. And this is the trade union representative telling me that my contract of employment is invalid. And that at that point it became obvious that in actual fact the Prison Officers Association was not a trade union. It was little more than a tool of management used to control the workforce, because you had no recourse to any representation. Seriously. And not only that, let me tell you this, it happened to be 1980. The interest rates in the United Kingdom were at something like 15 to 17% above the base rate. So that's how much. If you wanted to have a mortgage, your mortgage rates were going at around about 15, 17%. That's the way it was for everybody. You wanted to borrow money, you were borrowing it at ridiculous rates like 20%, 25%. These are standard rates. Businesses were suffering all over the place. I knew people who were running businesses who were running up debts of like £100,000 a year in interest. Ridiculous. And anyway, so what happened was, I heard that the Prison Officers Association General Executive had taken money from the union and lent it to themselves, which was contrary to the terms and conditions and the rules and regulations of the trade union. I was told that they'd borrowed tens of thousands of pounds and lent it to themselves at a reduced interest rate, which was contrary to the proper proceedings of the union, because the union funds these could only be used for the benefit of the membership. So the staff at Strangeways had a whip round and paid for me and one other member of staff to go down to London to see the books of the trade union. I was a member of the POA at the time, and that you were allowed to go down and examine the books. So myself and another officer, I think his name was Arthur Ball, went down to London. We made a written appointment with the executive, the chairman of the Prison Officers Association, and myself and this guy went down, and we went in to see the president of the Prison Officers Association, and said to him, "We've come to specifically ask you on what authority you have lent yourself X amount of thousands of pounds of union funds, taken it out of the union bank account and lent to members of the executive committee at reduced interest rates, when the standard interest rate at the time was, as I said, 15 to 18%, and that's quite a considerable amount. And they were being lent money, and I had information they'd lent it to them at 5%. So the actual trade union funds were being depleted because of their actions. So the guy who was the chairman, the treasurer of the Prison Officers Association, was a chief officer at HMP Prison Dartmoor, and he came up from Dartmoor to see me, and he gave me a copy of the annual report of the prison service and said, "That's the authority upon which we're acting." I said, "Well, I can see that it's the annual report from conference." I said, "But where in this does it give you the authority to actually lend yourself money? Because you've lent yourself over £100,000 of union money that belongs to the union. You've lent it to yourself at reduced interest rates. Where in this annual report to conference does it state that you're entitled to do that?" So he showed me the treasurer's report to conference, and in it stated that monies would be made available for members of the executive committee to purchase houses at a reduced interest rate. That was the treasurer's report. However, the treasurer's report is a statutory report that must be made each year to annual conference, and it is not a policy document. It's not a policy change document. To actually change the policy of the trade union, which only allowed the funds to be used for the benefit of the members, there had to be a change of standing orders, and there had been no change of standing orders. So I asked him to show me where this had happened. Show me. This is the chief officer, by the way, the head of discipline for HMP Dartmoor, and I'm a Buckshee jailer from Strangeways, or so they thought. Anyway, he said to me, "That's the report. I am the treasurer. I have authorised it in accordance with the chairman." I said, "And tell me this." I said, "Has the chairman benefited from the money that's been lent out?" He said, "Well, he has borrowed money from the union to purchase his property." I said, "This at a reduced interest rate?" "Well, yes, because it's to his benefit and he's benefiting the union." I said, "You cannot do this. This is an offence. Get out." He said, "I've shown you what you're doing. That's all you're getting." So I said, "I'll tell you what, I am getting out." I said, "But I ain't going back to Strangeways. I'm going to the fraud squad." And I went from the head offices in London, and I went into London, to central London, into Scotland Yard, and made a formal complaint to the fraud squad that the trade union funds had been misappropriated by the executive, and it had been used for the benefits of the executive officers, including the chairman, against the actual statutory rules of the union, and that therefore this amounted to fraud. The Scotland Yard officer that I saw there took all the notes and said, "Right, we're going to put this up, we're going to look into this," and indeed they did. It was in all the papers. You can look back 1980, it was about Prison Officers Association accused of fraud. There was holy hell on about this. So I had really got angry about this, that they're doing this, taking our money. We paid each month to this union. What were they doing with the funds? Lending it to themselves. Great, eh? I mean, wonderful that, except it's no good for the actual rank and file members. But this chief officer from Dartmoor was trying to tell me it was. So I made that formal complaint. And you may wonder what happened. Well, let me tell you this. The fraud squad did set about interviewing the executive officers of the Prison Officers Association. And what do you think happened? They all resigned. And they were replaced by their mates. So this made me even more angry. So I decided, I was studying law and I had friends who were lawyers and solicitors and barristers, and I spoke to them. I said, will you help me to make a formal complaint to the certification office? Every registered trade union has to have a certificate of independence. They have to be independent. That means that they cannot be dependent upon the employer for the basic essentials of running a union. They have to have their own stationery, they have to have their own telephone bills, they have to have their own offices, they have to have their own legal department. They cannot rely upon their employer to provide this. And the Prison Officers Association in the entire United Kingdom had only one office, and that was in London, and all the rest of the offices were situated within the prison walls and at the discretion of the governor. So the Prison Officers Association were, by definition, not an independent trade union. So, along with 2 or 3 lawyers, I sat down and we made a formal complaint to the certification office. Look it up, go online, certification office, trade union. I made a formal complaint that the Prison Officers Association was not an independent trade union and should be struck off. Because they weren't representing me, they were representing the management. And not only were they representing the management, they were using the funds that the rank and file members paying in to lend to themselves. Utter nonsense. How they got away with it, I don't know, but they did get away with it. And subsequently I was subjected to a degree of intimidation. You can probably understand why. They weren't very happy that their little empire was being shaken by this guy from Strangeways. So the governor, I was invited to go on television, because by this time I was the general secretary of an independent trade union, a really independent trade union called the Prison Force Federation. I was invited to go on various television stations speaking and radio stations speaking about why we needed representation in the prison service. And the basic thing was, we were being required to work in conditions that were an insult to humanity, the human rights of not only the prisoners, because don't forget, in the prisons, those disgusting, disgraceful conditions didn't just pertain to the people who were locked in the cells. They were the same conditions that the jailers were subjected to, and it was an insult to our humanity. We were being required. If we go back, say, 70, 80 years, what would we have been doing then, Concentration camps? Oh, well, this is what we've got to do. No, it isn't what we've got to do. We need a trade union to tell the management we will not do it. So I formed a proper trade union, the Prison Force Federation. I was the elected general secretary, and we had a bank account. We had offices outside of the prison walls, and we had meetings. And the governor called me in, and I was charged for being on television. Said I'd declined there, because they told me, you may not speak to the press, you may not speak to the media, you are a serving officer and you're subject to the Official Secrets Act, etc., etc. If any of you have seen the Strangeways documentary made in 1979, 1980, you'll see on it there the governor and the chief officer, who is a member of the POA, by the way, the number one chief officer, sitting down with the governor, deciding how they're going to charge me with offences under the Official Secrets Act, or whatever they're going to come up with. So eventually they did charge me, and they wheeled me in for adjudication. And I said, "This is not within your authority. It's out of your authority. When I've been on television, I'm acting as the general secretary of an independent trade union that has a certificate of independence, and under the trade union law, my position as an officer of the trade union supersedes any other position I hold." So that is the position that is manifest. That's the position that takes predominance. Nonsense. You're not talking to me like that. You're a serving prison officer here. You're subject to the disciplinary code. And they stitched me up something terrible. They give me 7 years restricted bloody promotion, reduced in service rank, and all this, that and the other. And basically they set about destroying me. I appealed to the Secretary of State, and subsequently the Secretary of State hadn't got any choice. He said, he wrote back and said, "Yes, this is incorrect, and there has been a mistake in the adjudication procedure. This is null and void." But by that time, half the staff of Strangeways were terrified that if it could happen to me as the General Secretary, what possible chance did they have? These people, I tell you, not only did they say I was with Colonel Gaddafi and a communist, but they were going to destroy me and subject me to ridiculous charges that if I couldn't defend myself, how could I defend them? But I did defend myself, and I did win. But by that time, months had passed. It took a long time. And it wasn't just the only thing. There were people there who were, as I mentioned before, I've been physically assaulted. There was a guy there, what was he called? Big H. He was about 6'6", great big fella, and I was working on the second landing, on A2 landing, unlocking and locking up prisoners. And I don't know if he'd been to the club drinking or what, but it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he started shouting abuse at me. He was a senior officer, like a sergeant, something like that, shouting abuse at me. "Sutton, when you come down here, I'm going to give you the best tiding of your life. You little bastard, you're not going to tell me about my union." And I said, "Are you mad?" I said, "There are prisoners out on the landing here." And I shouted, I spoke down to him, I said, "Don't speak to me like that. I'm going to give you the best pasting you've ever had." So there were prisoners out on the landing, so I went to see these prisoners. I said, "I want a statement from you, that you've actually heard this." "Oh, we heard it, all right, what the hell's going on?" I said, "Never mind that." So I wrote the statements out, they signed it, at such and such a time, this officer started shouting abuse and threats and said he was going to terminate Mr. Sutton, and I got about 3 statements, and I made my own statement out, and I went to see the governor. I said, "I want to register a complaint." I didn't go and see the chief officer, there's no point, you just ripped all of them up. So I went straight to the governor, and the governor said, "Right," he said, "come in and sit down, Mr. Sutton." He said, "What is it?" So I showed him the statements. He said, "You've been taking statements from prisoners against prison officers." I said, "These are human beings, these are people." I said, we've got a senior officer here who's shouting abuse at me, threatening my life, yeah, whilst there's people walking around openly. I said, "This cannot go on." I said, I believe that the man has been drinking in the club." I said, "And it's quite possible that you've witnessed this, because you've been in the club yourself, haven't you, sir?" Well, that didn't go down too well with the governor, believe me. "What am I going to do with this?" he said to me, asking me what I'm going to do with this. I said, "Well, listen," I said, "I realise it's a delicate situation." I said, "So I would like you to put this in my record of service." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I want you to note what I'm saying here, my complaint, and put my complaint and these statements in my record of service, so that in the event that this maniac that you're employing as a senior officer does decide to physically attack me, then you've got a record of the complaint that I've made, and I have then got an action, because it's your responsibility to provide me with a safe venue, safe location for me to carry out my duties." "Get out of my office!" Pow! I don't know, Hey, I tell you what, it was mad. Tales from the jails. Intimidation. Wow, they wouldn't get away with that today, would they?